Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to share with you how to trade the weekly pivots. On the screen here is a chart of the QQQs, the triple Qs. And don't worry, at the end of the video, I'm going to share with you exactly how you can get the weekly pivots every single week for the Qs, the SPY, and the Russell, the IWM. Anytime you see my chart on these markets, you will see this orange dashed line. I move this every week based on where that weekly pivot number is. But in this video, I'm not going to talk about how to get that weekly pivot video, although I will share it at the end of the video. What I'm most interested in talking about today is sharing with you how to use this weekly pivot and how to trade it. I went ahead and zoomed out here. This is the same chart of the triple Qs now on a weekly time frame. You'll see the weekly pivot sits right here at 347.54. And you'll notice that we are now approaching midday on Wednesday. This entire week has been traded above this weekly pivot point. Going back to the daily chart, and so this is one of the first scenarios that can happen in how to trade the weekly pivot. If you stay above, if you open the week above that weekly pivot and you never seem to retest it, that is extremely bullish, and you would expect that now as we approach the end of the week that we will simply stay above that pivot. So that is the first way that I trade the weekly pivot number. If we're staying above it, it's bullish. If we stay below it, it's bearish, and I'll favor more to the downside. Let's take a look at some other things that can happen on a weekly basis and how to trade them using the weekly pivots. The second scenario can be that you start trading below this weekly pivot, and then the market starts to rally back up. As you see that turn in the market on a weekly basis, this weekly pivot often becomes an upside target if you start to trade that turn in the market. As a market starts to move up and it gets closer and closer to that weekly pivot, the reverse can also happen if you start above it and then you start making a turn down. That weekly pivot starts to become aligned in the sand, and it also starts to become very magnetic. And so the trade can often have that weekly pivot be a magnet point, a drawing point on those trades where you expect the overall market, you expect the ETF or the stock to trade back to that weekly pivot. The third trade is the bounce, the test off the weekly pivot. Often you will play around the weekly pivot and then you'll go up, and then you'll start to come down. And one of my favorite trades is to start the watch and maybe we just slightly come below that weekly pivot and then we move up. Check out my other video on the look below and fail. Using that weekly pivot as a look below and fail or a look above and fail, using that weekly pivot number as that line in the sand is often extremely profitable. And so in that case, what you're doing is you're waiting for it to come down, and then it starts bouncing off that weekly pivot and goes back to the upside if you're in a bullish trend, or it starts to come back down to the bottom side of that if you're in more of a bearish trend. Another thing to keep in mind as you go from week to week is to watch and see what is happening to that weekly pivot. From one week to the next, is it moving up or is it moving down? If the weekly pivot continues to move down, you are in more of a bearish trend. If you start seeing this weekly pivot from week to week to week start moving up, that indicates more of a bullish trend, and your trades should reflect that you're in more of a bullish trend. And so the question is, how do you get these weekly pivot numbers? I post the weekly pivot numbers every week in the Discord channel. Those are available. Those links are available in the comment section below. The weekly pivots come from a combination of things, including Fibonacci retracement, moving average movement, as well as pivot points and Fibonacci levels. And that allows me to kind of come up with what this weekly pivot number is. And I do post that, as I just mentioned, every single week in the Discord. That link is in the bio.